Hello there, I'm the biblical translator, and this is about Nepal and the tragedy there. So, there's something about a disaster like this that can leave you looking at the pictures and thinking, how on earth could that much water, mud, ice, and rock suddenly come down a mountain and wipe out homes, road, and entire communities? And that is really what I want to talk about today, because we have all heard the terrible news coming out of Nepal and the border region with Tibet. But sometimes understanding what happened helps us to understand just how vulnerable human beings can be when nature suddenly changes the rules. On Wednesday, 26 August, a catastrophic flash flood tore through Nepal's Rasua district near the Chinese border and then travelled down the Botekoshki and Trishuli river systems. And as I speak, Nepal has confirmed 469 deaths and 977 people are still unaccounted for, although those figures are expected to change as rescue teams reach areas that have been cut off. More than 3,000 people have already been rescued. When we hear numbers like 469 dead and nearly 1,000 missing, it is very easy for those numbers to become another statistic. But 469 is not a statistic to the family that is waiting for somebody to come home. It is somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's child, somebody's brother, sister, husband, wife, or friend. And among those still missing are local residents, police and military personnel, workers, and many foreign visitors who were travelling through the region, including people on pilgrimage routes towards Mount Kailash. So this disaster did not only affect one little isolated village, it affected a whole chain of communities and people travelling through one of the major routes between Nepal and Tibet. The first report suggested that an earthquake might have triggered the disaster, but scientists have since looked at the seismic information and satellite images and reached a different conclusion. What happened appears to have started high up in the Himalayas, when a large section of glacier ice and rock suddenly collapsed. And when I say collapsed, I don't mean a little piece of ice breaking off. We are talking about a huge mass of ice and rock coming down a mountain with enormous force. The US Geological Survey says the collapse happened in the glaciated mountain area around Langtang Lerong, and the energy released was enough to register like a magnitude 5.2 earthquake. In other words, the collapse itself created the earthquake-like shaking, but it wasn't an earthquake that caused the mountain to collapse. Now imagine what happens when a huge amount of ice, rock, mud, and other materials suddenly enters a river in a steep Himalayan valley. The rivers don't have time to gradually rise. The water is suddenly pushed, blocked, redirected, and loaded with debris. There is evidence that the falling material temporarily obstructed the river before the water broke through, creating an enormous surge downstream. And this is why calling it simply a flood doesn't actually describe what people experienced. It was water, yes, but it was also rock, mud, ice, trees, and whatever else that enormous moving mass picked up along the way. It became a wall of destruction travelling through the valley. The Trishuli River reportedly rose as much as 9 meters in 30 minutes. That's roughly the height of a 3-story building. Now think about that. 9 meters in 30 minutes. If you live beside a river and it rises slowly, you may have time to hear a warning. Collect your children, get into your car, move to a higher ground, or get out of the area. But when the river can rise that dramatically in half an hour, the situation is completely different, and that helps us understand why so many people were caught. These mountain valleys are not empty spaces. People live there. They build homes, shops, roads, bridges, hydroelectric projects, and businesses alongside the rivers, because the rivers are part of everyday life. And because the valleys provide some of the most practical routes through this difficult mountainous landscape. Timur, Rasuwagadi, and Saya Brubisi were among the places badly affected. And the destruction continued much further downstream into other districts. Scientists are still investigating the exact chain of events as to why the glacier had collapsed, but there is a much bigger environmental picture. The Himalayan region is warming, glaciers are retreating, and the loss of ice can destabilize mountain slopes. As ice melts and permafrost weakens, rock that has been held together or supported by frozen material can become unstable. Scientists have been warning for years that warming in high mountain regions can increase the risk of landslides, ice avalanches, glacial lake floods, and other cascading disasters. A warming climate is making high mountain environments more unstable and is increasing the conditions in which these kinds of hazards can occur. And that brings me to the question I think many people will be asking. Could this have been prevented? We probably could not have stopped the mountain from collapsing. You cannot put a fence around a glacier and tell it to stay where it is. But preventing the physical collapse and preventing the loss of life are two different things. We may not always be able to stop a natural hazard, but we can sometimes stop a natural hazard from becoming a human catastrophe. And this is where early warning systems become so important. Scientists have been saying that vulnerable Himalayan communities need better monitoring of glaciers, rivers, landslides, and potentially dangerous lakes, together with warning systems that can reach people quickly. Sensors, cameras, satellite monitoring, and river gauges can detect changes, but technology is only useful if the warning actually reaches the people who need it and they know what to do when they receive it. Hazard mapping, stronger building standards, evacuation routes, and designated safe areas can make an enormous difference, because sometimes the difference between life and death is not whether the disaster happens, it is whether somebody gets the warning 10 minutes earlier and knows where to go. The Bible gives us something worth thinking about. Proverbs 22:3 says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge." I don't read that as saying that people who suffer disaster were somehow foolish or that God punished them. The people who died in Nepal did not deserve what happened to them. Nature does not check whether you are a good person before it destroys your house. And that verse does remind us that wisdom involves recognizing danger and preparing for it. We can pray for protection. We can also build warning systems. We can have faith, but we can also listen to scientists. We can trust God, but we also use the knowledge and intelligence He has given human beings to reduce unnecessary loss of life. And perhaps that is one of the uncomfortable lessons in this tragedy. We often call something a natural disaster, as though nature alone is responsible for everything that follows. But the hazard may be natural. The scale of human loss can sometimes be influenced by human decisions. Where we build, how we build, whether we monitor dangerous areas, whether warnings reach communities, whether emergency services can get through, and whether people know how to evacuate can all affect what happens when nature suddenly turns violent. Right now, families are still waiting, rescue workers are still searching, and authorities are still trying to reach places where roads and bridges have simply disappeared. Even now, there is another danger because a lake formed by the landslide has been filling with water, creating fears of another flood and forcing rescue operations to be adjusted. So while we watch this tragedy from thousands of miles away, perhaps the lesson is not simply what a terrible flood. It is to understand how quickly the world around us can change, how connected communities are to the natural environment, and why preparation matters. We cannot control the mountains. We cannot control every glacier, every storm, or every river, but we can learn, we can monitor, we can warn, we can build more wisely, and most importantly, we can remember that behind every number in the news report is a human being whose life mattered to somebody. 469 confirmed dead, nearly 1,000 missing are not just figures telling us how big the disaster is. They are reminders of how many individual lives have been interrupted, how many families are grieving, and how many people are still waiting for an answer. And perhaps that is where understanding this tragedy should begin, not with the size of the flood, but with the value of the people who were standing in its path. And that's all I've got to say. Take care of yourself and each other.